It's white to move and mate in 3. Can you solve this puzzle? There's only one solution. Hi, this is Adult Chess Improver at Adult Chess Trainer. My name is Rich, and today we're going to be looking at a puzzle which I believe is pretty instructive because it's going to go over how to look at light squares versus dark squares and also some of the patterns for checkmating. So let's go ahead and get started. If you want to go ahead and solve the puzzle on your own, go ahead and pause the video. If you can solve it, go ahead and put the solution in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to be going through sort of a method for finding the mate in 3. So one thing we want to do to start off is to find all the checks, and then we can start eliminating bad ones, right? So it's a good exercise just in general to be able to identify all checks in a given position. So here we have checks 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8. So it looks like there's 8 total checks in the position. We can go ahead and eliminate the 3 checks here because they just leave the queen free to take. So those are kind of silly checks there. So that leaves 5 checks to consider at this point. And so we have checks here and over here. And here we can look at, and then we have this check here and this check here. Now, how do we know which ones to start looking for first? So we're going to make this multiple choice. And so let's just take, for instance, I'll tell you it's going to be either this, 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 or this. Okay. And let's call this option A here. This is option B. This is option C. This is option D. Okay, so how do we know which one to look at first? Well, let's just pick one of them, right? Let's pick this one right here. And where does that lead us? So if we check with the queen over here, you have to think about what escape squares the black king has. So the queen is cutting off these squares right here. This bishop is cutting off those squares. And the king has some places to escape, like that square there, that square there, that square there. So, for instance, the king has three ways to get out of this check. And if we look at, let's say, another check, which is this one right here, which was option B, and we're cutting off this way and cutting off this way. How many places? Well, let's see, the queen would cut off these squares as well. So there's less choices for the king to go, which are these 2 squares. So one thing you're looking at is like how forcing is the check, right? That's important. And then if we take a quick look at the other checks here, let's say we were to check right here, then where can the king go? So when the queen is right next to the king like this, this is an important pattern to recognize. It's cutting off squares going in those directions, all like that. So where can the king go? It only has 2 escape squares, which are those 2 squares there. And remember, the queen is covered by the bishop here. So the queen is safe there, and the king would only have 2 escape squares. One is occupied by a black pawn, which means it really only has 1 escape square. So this is a move that's worthy of looking at first before the other moves because there's less options for black. It's going to be easier to analyze and calculate. It's more forcing. So how about the other option we had here, which was to move the queen to d6. Again, if we remember that pattern, then the king only has these 2 squares to go to. And sorry, let's do that. These 2 squares. And one of those is occupied by a pawn. So you can see these 2 options here appear to be ones we want to analyze first and more likely to lead to the solution. Another thing to consider about that is we have a dark squared bishop, and this dark squared bishop is defending those squares that the queen is occupying there on e7 and d6. So the bishop and queen can work in conjunction with each other if the queen goes on a dark square. So it's more likely that a dark square would be our solution, okay? And this is where the dark squares and light squares come into play. And thinking about the colors of the bishops, and the color complex is here. Okay, so let's just say this move right here, which I believe was option D. And where can this king go? We already determined has one choice, which is right there. And then how can we follow this up with another check? So we can either go here or here, and there's other more checks that we're not going to consider, like here and here and here, because those don't lead to anything. So let's say we follow up with this. Now the king has two escape squares here and here. And so let's say the king goes here, and then how do we follow this up with another check? We go here, and then the king escapes there, and the king gets out this way. Okay, so that is likely not it. So by process of elimination, we've sort of said the checks on the light squares aren't as good, and we looked at this check. So the one check that was left, I believe that was option C, is this check right here. So let's take a look at that one. The two escape squares for the king would be going back and diagonal. One of those squares is occupied, so the king can only go here. Now we look at what the follow-up check would be. Again, we're looking for dark squares because we have a dark squared bishop, and that can cover the queen coming in and coming nice and close to the king. And again, these two squares would be the only two that the black king can use to escape. So it'd go there. And now you notice the pattern here. When the queen comes here, these two squares are occupied and there's no escape for the king. So there's the solution to the puzzle. It was a mate in 3, and that's sort of a breakdown, and hopefully some of those hints help you find quicker mating patterns in your own games. Pay attention to the colors of the squares, especially when there's bishops involved, and how those relate to each other and interact with each other. So hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you next time.